Welcome to the Embodiment Podcast. This show is for you if you see the body as more than a brain taxi. It's for people interested in coming home to the body as a holistic aspect of who we are and how we live. Episodes contain practical tips, exercises you can take away, and interviews with specialists from around the world. I'm your host for today, Mark Walsh. On the show today, Diane Musho Hamilton. She's joining us for the podcast, but also for the Embodiment Conference. You couldn't make the dates of the conference, so we've recorded this in advance, which I'm super happy about to include her. But Diana's, in my researched opinion, one of the best facilitators I know. She's really top end when it comes to facilitation. She's an author. Her expertise is, well, a number of subjects, but a lot around mediation and conflict resolution. So someone that gets into a lot of fights of various kinds. I'm looking forward to learning something. And she's also a Zen. She's also a Soto Zen teacher. So I'm expecting some Mr. Miyagi shit to be thrown at us today. So Diane, it's so nice to see you again.
It's so great to be with you, Mark. I appreciate you organizing all this and giving me a chance to hang out with you this afternoon for you.
Where are you today?
I'm in Salt Lake City, Utah. I just came back from a trip to Iceland and some teaching in Denmark a couple of days ago. So I'm a little bit on your time right now.
Yeah, well, one of my students was with you in Denmark and had a good time, she told me.
Oh, good. Okay, so, great.
Let's start with your body story then. This is the Embodiment Conference, the Embodiment Podcast. So let's start with your sort of body history. Like, how did that become onto your radar as a thing that's more than a brain taxi?
Well, I grew up in the Western United States, and I grew up in a small town on the Utah border between Utah and Nevada, and I spent a lot of my time outside as a child. So, you know, the body, you could say the planet, the earth, trees, the plants, the water, and I spent many, many long days riding horses in the mountains as a child. I would get up in the morning, get on my horse, leave before breakfast, and come down after dark. So I had a very earthy upbringing, and as a young girl, I just had that kind of lucky experience to be born into a generation in which young girls and later young women were really invited into athletics. I played a lot of sports as a kid, a lot of games. I was, you might say a tomboy in the sense that my physicality was a big part of my growing up. And I think when I was in high school, it was the first year that there was organized sports for women. We had this thing called Title IX in the States that basically said we have to give girls the same opportunities as boys. And that was a big breakthrough when I was a kid. And so when I first started playing basketball, women had 6 players on the court, 2 defensive players, 2 offensive players, and 2 rovers. Kind of the idea that women couldn't all run up and down the court. So, things changed.
They had to have more players.
Yeah, yeah. So I just grew up in that way.
Okay, so you grew up with some sports there, and then when did the sort of the Zen and the mediation stuff begin? How did you get into those two areas?
Well, I mean, mediation and meditation have the same root, and they both mean basically bringing what is 2 into 1. So on the meditation cushion, we bring our body, breath, mind into harmony with the environment in the here and now. And in mediation, if you're functioning as a neutral, then you bring together disputing parties. You know, what are the common wants and needs, and what kind of an agreement can you shape? So in a certain way, I just had this impulse towards bringing things together. It's a huge part of my identity, and also, in a way, you might say my neurosis. My family was very intense and loving, but also our conflicts were always out in the open. And I think I was just looking for a way to hold people together. I started meditating when I was 22, and I started mediating when I was about 30. I have a degree in Buddhist psychology, and that's when I came out, I never really thrived in one-on-one psychological settings, and I liked group work, and I think I just naturally gravitated towards being a mediator. I like the action. I like getting in the middle of a fight, have that kind of nature, like you.
Yeah, well, I want to be on one side of the fight, more in the middle, but I'm taking those things. So let's. I've asked Stephen Cote over this, Paul Linden this as well. I'd love to get your take on it. Okay. What is the role of the body in mediation and peace more generally? Because a lot of people might say, oh, mediation's about getting people talking or getting people listening, maybe. So what's the role of the body in all that? Surely it's just about listening to each other, no?
Well, eventually it is, but I think one of the things that we're starting to learn more and more about, and it's really the case, is that when people come into a mediation, they're usually in a dispute. They usually feel threatened. And when they feel threatened, some level of fight or flight is happening. So they're having a dose of adrenaline, of cortisol, of norepinephrine. And did you say you were speaking to Stephen?
Yeah, interviewed Stephen on the podcast, but he'll be later. He'll be on this on the conference as well.
Yeah, so he knows a lot about this, and also what flow states are and what they look like, and they have a very, very different kind of chemical palette. So it's not uncommon when people come into a mediation session that they're contracted. They might have an increased heart rate. Their palms might be sweaty. They might feel adrenaline rushing in their limbs. They might feel the grip of anxiety in their solar plexus. They might be clenching their jaw and their teeth. And the truth is that when fight or flight is stimulated, when there's a perceived threat, that almost always, unless you're quite practiced, access to your thinking or your prefrontal cortex is literally impaired.
Yeah, dumb.
Yeah.
Like that fight-flight response makes people dumb and mean, so they actually act less intelligently and less kindly than their just everyday self would. And
yeah, absolutely, totally. In fact, you can see it sometimes just in your own relationships when you feel threatened by your partner or your spouse or friend, and all of a sudden you're with them and you just feel really defensive, and your mind can't remember. You can't access a positive memory. Because everything in you is organized in the here and now towards protecting yourself. And so any kind of overriding cognition, like I'm for this person, I like this person, those things all disappear until you get really good at it. You're
not thinking, hey, what's the long-term relationship with this person? You're not even perceiving correctly.
No. You're just thinking, why did I marry this person?
Like, they're all bad. This is a mistake.
They torture me.
So the thinking, the perception, the memory, the planning, that's all impaired. And also the emotional connection system is impaired. Like
the positive emotional connection is impaired.
Yeah. So what do you do? Like, we're in that situation. I won't go into details, but just before this call, I was involved in a little bit of a conflict myself with someone sending me some messages. And I'm like, whoa, I want to kill this person.
Yeah, totally. Yeah.
Like, what do we do?
Yeah. Well, first thing is just to notice that you want to kill this person. Like, just notice that. Like, we, in the work we do, we're bringing mindfulness awareness to the mind and to the body, and to notice that the mind is saying, I want to kill this person, and that the body is basically in a defensive posture, looking for the quickest way to get rid of this situation. Depending on your nature, there are three sort of basic responses to conflict. One is avoid, one is accommodate, and the other is to fight. And so for me, I tend to have a fighting style. Yeah. And so I'm just basically looking for the quickest way to defeat my opponent.
Yeah. To crush your enemy. Driven
crush
before.
My enemy.
Oh, Dan. I've been in Sweden the last week, and there's definitely a sort of cultural pattern around this as well here. There's a sort of placating, kind of avoidant, make nice style, which is utterly bizarre.
Yeah.
So there's this cultural pattern. And the first thing I'm hearing from you here is that we notice, right? So it's like, oh, look, my breathing's tight, my belly's tight. Maybe now isn't the best time to talk about this.
Right.
Or I'm creating a story here, which isn't necessarily true, right? So we notice in body, emotion, mind, and only then can we step in. So this is where the mindfulness is a huge gift, right? That you've developed that muscle of noticing.
Yeah, precisely. Use it. Notice, to be able to notice that it's happening is sort of half the battle, in the sense that usually we're so deeply embedded in our responses that the idea that we could literally kind of separate our witnessing awareness and pay attention to the sensations in our bodies and to the restrictedness in our breath and the negative thoughts that start to flood in. And so one of the things that we know about the nervous system is we can actually recalibrate it. And the best way to do that within a matter of seconds, if you slow your breathing down, if you create a rhythm in your breath and repeat it, and if you decrease the volume of breath so that you're sipping breath through a straw, if you do that, sustain that for 30 seconds, you will literally stop the production of adrenaline and cortisol. But what tends to happen is we start doing that, and then our defensive system feeds us a thought that, wait a minute, don't calm down. Actually, you need to be on guard because you're going to get taken advantage of. And so then the feedback loop starts up again. So as soon as you have the negative or defensive thought, all of a sudden you're back to the races.
So this is, really a beautiful human thing, is that we can step in and we can reduce this animal fight-flight response in the same way as the devilish thing about being human is we can keep creating it in a way that animals can't mentally, right? So we have this disadvantage, but then this huge advantage. A dog can't calm itself down, but a dog's equally not going to keep making itself angry by thinking about something, right? So we've got this awareness to being human. And as you say, it can be really simple things like breathing a little slower, lengthening the out-breath, opening the edges of the breath. I point listeners to Paul Linden, his techniques, Stephen Kotev, there's, lots of people talk about the techniques, but that mindfulness base seems so critical. And sometimes I catch it as I'm doing it.
Yeah.
Like today, it was a little bit like after the event, I went,
Totally.
No,
because it caught you unexpectedly, and my guess is they were making accusations. Usually that's what's happening when we get threatened. There's some kind of an accusation. Is that fair?
Yeah, it's a threatening thing, but I won't go into details, but kind of pretty big and unexpected. And personal triggers around shadow as well, which I think is the other bit here, right? And so the recovery speed is also important, right? Is it a minute? Is it a day? Is it a year? Right?
Well, if you become triggered, which is the language we use really for a stimulated fight or flight response, if you become triggered and you start dripping adrenaline and cortisol, if you regulate your breath, bring your attention to the here and now, and stop any kind of negative thoughts about the future, it still takes 18 minutes for those chemicals to clear out.
Wow, I heard 10, but 18 even more. So this is where I do this with my wife. I do this pretty well. I'll say, you know what, I'm going to go for a walk. Let's talk about this when I'm back. And I'm aware that I walk for at least 20 minutes actually around the park. Yeah. And usually back, I'm like, you know what, it wasn't such a big deal. I love you. Let's talk about it. That
totally. Yeah, and I mean, it depends. I mean, I'm saying you can stop the production of cortisol immediately, but how long does the adrenaline and cortisol that are in the body already, how long does it take to clear out and to come back to homeostasis? Let's just say 10 to 20 minutes. Yeah. Something like that. So you have to be careful, because if you re-engage, you're right back in it. So let's just take your situation. In that moment, you get an unexpected phone call. The person on the other end of the line is not friendly. They're making certain kinds of claims or accusations that you don't agree with. They're not asking you many questions. And there's just a quality of something threatening about that whole experience. So of course, we're in the grip of eons old intelligence. This is old stuff,
Just we need to sort of actually be a bit forgiving with ourselves. Like, as you say, it's old.
It's really old. It's old and it's efficient.
Quick, it's saved our lives for generations and generations, and it's there in our systems. And we train this, right? Like, I have cold showers as a way of training, working with this response. We do martial arts, we do Zen, and we sit there till our knees hurt. Like the ways of training this so that we get, as Jordan Peterson says, we go out to meet the dragon rather than waiting for when the dragon comes to us.
Yeah, and I think that in martial arts. Certainly within the Aikido experience, to kind of receive the attack and then to not to fight it, but to somehow transmute it is really important. It's not the same as avoiding. It's not the same as making nice immediately. Cool. It actually has to do with receiving, and in this case, listening, using the listening as another way of calming things down a little bit for you and for the other. And this response of when someone's particularly criticizing or attacking out of the blue, like, okay, so just a minute, it matters what you're saying. I want to hear what it is you have to say. I notice that I feel a little bit threatened, or my nervous system is kind of aroused. So just give me a minute. If you could maybe slow down a bit and tell me again what your concern is. And you could even reframe it from your accusation to your concern. What is it you're concerned about? And then that process of listening and actually hearing the other will, in the same way that Aikido, you transmute this attack, the listening can't help but kind of lower the intensity for the other as well. Listening doesn't mean agreement. We always make the mistake that it does. We make the mistake. We think that if we suddenly stop and listen to what someone has to say, somehow they'll think we agree. doesn't mean we agree at all. It just simply means that we want to understand clearly what's being said. Usually, if you can do that next step, then you've changed the dynamic. Usually.
Nice. So I remember it was an Aikido teacher might say, he said the action that creates peace is listening. And every mediator I know says this is the key thing. Remember a time when I was really up against it, and I phoned my friend Stephen up and I said, listen, what do I do? And he basically just said, shut up and listen. Like,
oh, really? Yeah. Okay.
Kind of New Jersey about it, and that's what I did. I was on the phone with this person. It was a real life-changing issue. And I just said, you know what, just shut up for 10 minutes. I almost had to put my hand over my mouth a couple of times.
Yeah, totally.
That changed the whole situation around.
No, it's not right. It's not fair. That isn't what I meant. That isn't right. You don't understand. I mean, always we're defending. Yeah. So just but it takes a lot of mindfulness to be able to do that, because as we said, everything in your body is saying,
and
fuck this person.
Shadow piece, because like what got me today, I realized like fairly soon afterwards, was that it was resonant with something historical. So it wasn't just that there was a current threat. The current threat was pretty moderate. So I was kind of a bit disappointed with myself that I was reactive. And I was like, hey, Mark, come on, you're an Aikido teacher. You do embody me more together. So I was judging myself. And I thought, well, why was I reactive around this particular issue? And I realized it had a resonance that was nothing to do with the issue. So you know what I mean? So it's like we're not just responding, are we, in conflict to reality. We're also responding to the parts of ourselves we don't want to admit. We're responding to the history.
Yeah.
Could you speak to that?
That's true, for sure. Well, every one of us our self-identity is made up of all kinds of habitual patterns. And we have all kinds of injuries from the past. We have all kinds of identities we don't want to identify with. I made a mistake recently. A friend of mine, I didn't mean it the way he took it, but I was talking with this friend who has a chronic illness and has had it for over 15 years. And we have this ritual we do together. We're sort of like an old couple now. I just go over there and hang out with him. He's Italian, so he makes food and we watch TV. It's like, and that's kind of what his illness will allow. So I was complaining a couple of weeks ago about another friend who's just a hothead and how difficult dealing with his temperament is. So I'm telling my Italian friend this story, and I say, all of our friends are challenging, but some more than others. I said, you're not, being with you isn't challenging. And I said this in this really offhanded way. I said, you're just sick and lonely. He got so upset. And I was really surprised that he was so upset. I meant it somewhat affectionately. Yeah. And the way I view it, of course, from my side, is he is sick. And also being lonely is just, in a certain way, it's the shadow of being an American. We're so identified with our independence that we're all kind of lonely over here. So something in his experience, like that's a part of his identity he doesn't want to feel. I don't know if it relates to a memory or if it's just something that he has a judgment about, like I'm saying he's pathetic or something. But I was really surprised at the level of reactivity that he had about it. It came to me, it came as a surprise to me. I just didn't. Either I didn't intend it and I was surprised at the impact. So
it's often a sign that there's this shadow, this repressed content at work when it acts stronger than we'd go, okay, whoa, where did that come from?
Yeah, totally. And I actually apologize because I really honestly didn't mean it. I didn't mean to hurt his feelings. I wasn't feeling in any way negative towards him, but it really did make him mad and hurt his feelings. And my apology wasn't sufficient. So he's not talking to me right now.
Yeah. And we can bump into those every day, right? An offhand comment.
You should ask me why I'm laughing.
Why are you laughing?
I don't know.
See, there we go. We can explore this, right?
Totally.
And there is something funny and sad in our reactivity.
Yeah.
Blow up. Totally. We're on this planet. We're all dying. We're all suffering. We're all doing the best we fucking can. And then here we are shouting at each other and getting reactive with each other. There is something funny. It's sad as well, right? It's like the tragic humor of given that we're hurtling through space towards our death, that we're worrying about who burnt the pasta or what that you're offended about something.
I know, but it happens all the time. And so then I think that you were talking about, being easy on yourself about it. I mean, one way to be easy on yourself about it is just to realize that your reptilian brain, that function that picks up threat in the environment, is really very developed and skillful. It's like it's high intensity radar, And, that could also include something from your past that you're on the lookout for. So.
And that could be just you remind someone, I don't know, I had a school teacher who looked like you, or it could be like a deep trauma pattern as well, right?
Yeah.
Like I definitely people with trauma patterns massively overreact to things that in just tiny bit looked familiar.
Yeah. So here we are doing our best. And I do think that in working on it, I teach my students who are facilitators and mediators that they really have to learn how to be with this, because it's so much a part of the experience.
Yeah.
That if you can't learn how to calm the nervous system of the whole room, then basically you can't create an environment where people are doing their best thinking. Because you just simply can't think well when you're threatened. That's all there is to it.
Goes into your other work as a facilitator, right? So mediate, so calming nervous systems isn't just for sort of mediators in war zones or with divorced couples. It's all, as a facilitator, a lot of people listening to this will be facilitators, coaches, kinds of people. If people are not feeling safe, if people are on edge, if people are just a little bit threatened, a little bit like not respected, they're not gonna do their best work. They're not gonna be intuitive. They're not gonna be creative. I mean, creativity definitely goes out the window with fight or flight. So as facilitators, it's not just we're stopping people killing each other. There's at the other end of the spectrum, right, where we're people to feel totally relaxed so they can do their best stuff.
Absolutely. What we know about flow states are the opposite of states of threat. States of threat, we have heightened self-identity, heightened separation, heightened sense that we have to protect. Flow states, we have an experience of timelessness. I mean, in threat states, a sense of urgency. Timelessness in flow states, effortlessness, everything feels easy, and egolessness, the sense of self and separation dissolves. So they're literally the opposite. So
this happened with me and my translator in Russian. She got caught in the flow state bubble while translating for me in a training, and she was totally confused by it because she'd never had a state of selflessness before. Like she's never done a Zen retreat. It's just a regular Russian girl who was helping. It was like, what was that?
Wow.
Hours. It was really funny. She was caught in a flow state.
Wow. And it was unfamiliar to her. Yeah.
Never had I mean, for me, it was like, oh, that was pleasant and strange, but it's happened many times. I'm teaching and snowboarding. And the other thing that was reminds me of here is that flow states also come from challenge, but the difference is challenge with the resource to handle the challenge, right? It's not the flow states that are easy. They also there's a challenge, but there's the ability to respond to that.
Yeah, and lots of times the challenge requires our full attention to come into the moment. Just absolutely fully in the here and now. And when that fullness of the here and now comes online, self-identity tends to relate quite a lot to past and future, as you were just saying. So self-identity goes out. And I like to think of it in really simple terms, like imagine you're playing for the NBA and it's a really, intense and competitive third quarter, and all of a sudden, like, both teams hit a flow state, and it's just one pass and one basket and passing and baskets, and all of a sudden then that comes to an end. And during that process, people are not thinking about themselves because the action is so fast that you literally can't have a thought of yourself, or you create too much division. There's too much separation from the moment. And then, at the break, you think about yourself again.
Yeah, when I used to snowboard, occasionally I'd be like, oh, I'm doing really well here, and then I'd fall over.
Exactly.
And the self-thing comes in. And I wonder if this is why so many people are addicted to the extreme sports and S&M and all these things that are really big in the world now. Because it's enforced mindfulness. In the way Zen is so bloody hard because it's so bloody easy. Like, you're just sitting there. There's nothing to force you to engage. Like, people say snowboarding's my Zen. I'm like, not really, because you've got this wonderful thing helping you be present, whereas in Zen there's nothing helping you.
Nope, there's straight up awareness itself, and then you have to develop an appetite for what that is, or a sensation for what that is, and because otherwise you're suffering for the most part. So in a way, when you sit still for long periods of time, particularly without a lot of instruction, because Zen is sometimes referred to as meditation without handrails. You don't get a lot of instruction to focus on this or focus on that. And so you kind of have to find your way. And like, just as you start dropping conception, you start bringing a little more breath into the body, and your attention becomes more concentrated in the here and now. And then you start feeling that the kind of buildup, if you will, of energy and concentration. And then suddenly it's like, oh, okay. Like you have this sense of, but there aren't a lot of concepts and there aren't a lot of ideas about it. But it's definitely a very recognizable felt experience, what we call samadhi in Zen.
What is the relationship between Zen and the body? What's the role of the body in Zen? Somehow people have this idea of Zen being very disembodied or abstract, Zen mind. It's always mind, right? So
couldn't be further from the truth.
Set the record straight.
I'm going to set the record straight. I mean, sitting still is a tremendously embodied act. You can't sit still stably, easily for long periods of time if you're not 100% in your body. The first obstacle you encounter sitting still is the pain and disorganization in the body. And so I always say to my students, a lot of my students are former athletes of one kind or another. And I say, when you go into the Zendo, you need to walk into the Zendo in the body of an athlete, because the kind of attention that it requires, it's a very, very physical practice. It requires a lot of energy, a lot of intentionality. I mean, some of the old Zen masters talk about sweating, like just so much intensity. But the body it's a body-mind activity. Their body is absolutely 100%. I mean, how could it be separate? Such a dumb idea.
I mean, my first Zen session, I really felt like I was almost at war, because it has this militaristic quality.
Yeah.
And I'd been a living martial arts student of Japanese teachers already, so I thought I was a tough guy. But it was way harder sitting still for 10 days than it was jumping around for 10 days.
Yeah, that's the thing.
This is brutal.
There's no escape. You have to relax. You just keep relaxing the mind, including the pain, relaxing the mind. It's for sure. For sure. So where did you do it? Where were you when you did your session?
I did a couple with Junpo.
Oh, you did? Okay. Yeah.
Yeah.
Great. Yeah. Yeah. So, firsthand, requires a lot of dealing with the body. And, like anything, then we get in shape. If you do a lot of sitting meditation, your hips open and your places where you're holding and your connective tissue and your muscles relax and things start to straighten out. It's like the bodily embodied intelligence of sitting meditation. You get better and better and better at the posture, not because someone teaches you, but because your own body shows you the way.
Yeah, I mean, there's the way in which we become better at the skill of paying attention. And then just on the physical level, like I'm
Mm-hmm.
seeing particularly kind of younger people who have grown up with technology actually almost physically having to be like out. Like there's muscle that have short fascia that, do you know what it is? Almost now like a kind of ironing out process to sit.
Yeah. I know it. We're kind of, I mean, in a Zen setting, of course, emptying the mind is really important. So the mind-body situation are one. But we spend so much time on our devices and in our heads, and it's really easy not to notice the body when we're so focused on the content of our minds.
Okay, so back to our theme of kind of mediation here then. So taking a sideway into Zen, I like that. I mean, what are your kind of top tips for people out there? I mean, we all have conflicts. What are your top tips for people out there who want to kind of get a bit more skillful with conflict?
Well, I would say to first of all recognize that conflict is a tremendous opportunity for creativity. Because there's a lot of energy and there's usually a polarity of this and that or of me and you or whatever. And so there's a lot of energy in that dualism, you could say. There's always tension where there's conflict. So it could be erotic tension, or it could be aggression, or it could be whatever it is. There's latent energy there that can be used for the creative process. But people have really deeply held habitual patterns. So you really need to address what your pattern is, what your style is. And if you're avoidant, maybe learn a little bit how to deal with staying in. And if you're accommodating, then pay attention to what is it like to just let this relationship go? What is it like to take a stand for yourself? And if you're a fighter, what is it like to actually kind of drop that and maybe listen? So I think you have to kind of move against what your style is. And then usually with conflict, once we settle our nervous systems, conflict is so much easier to deal with when people are calm. So once you have to settle it all down a little bit and then start looking for underlying wants and needs. So this conflict that you're in right now, there's a sense that you're separate. There's a sense that somebody's doing something wrong. And if you wanted to call back and say, I'm interested in what you're saying and what your wants and what your needs are. And I want to look for overlapping wants and needs. What do we actually have in common? Is there some creative potential here that we could both benefit? So in the conflict resolution literature, we call that adding value, or in negotiation, we add value to a conflict. It's like we can actually bring something more to it, and something truly creative can come out of it. But it's all very counterintuitive. We're taught to fight, we're taught to avoid. So to do that is, you have to really want to, because the sensations in your body are telling you not to.
Yeah, there's an embodied piece to this as well, isn't there? Like, I was teaching a bunch of overly nice people about warrior pose, and we have a kind of no pose for boundary. I was trying to get them to the body of that. Mm-hmm. And it's like, there's an embodied sense of receiving and accommodating and letting go.
Yeah.
I remember I was in California doing Aikido years ago, and a guy says, Mark, it's about not fighting. And I kind of had, this is that's my best Californian accent. And I had this light bulb of like, oh, that's the body I'm trying to build. Ridiculously doing martial arts. That there's an embodiment there that's really going to help me. I need to keep reminding myself that and practicing that as an embodied piece, not as okay, I've listened to Diane once, I've got the theory, I can just do that. Because if like what you're saying is not that complicated. If everyone could just listen to this episode, this session, and be enlightened, right? That would be an easy done.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, and I do appreciate the people who work on this. I mean, I have a whole group of friends and colleagues that when we have a conflict, we just deal with it. And it's such a pleasure that nobody feels like they have to defend themselves particularly. We get more interested in what's really going on. There might be a moment of like, but then it's like, so what are you seeing? And what are you doing? And okay, should we do this? Should we do that? What's so great is it becomes really pretty efficient. Where lots of times now when we deal with conflict, it's so massively inefficient.
Time and energy.
Lord.
And it's
Lord.
So, I'm there with like the EFC crew as well. Like, we have a conflict. It's like, okay, so what I hear you saying is this. And, there's this trust in the goodwill, because we've got a lot of goodwill there, a lot of good history. There's ability to center on both sides. I remember there was some tricky issues around some kind of gender issues that were coming up. And I was able to sit down with a couple of my colleagues who identify as queer and talk about these issues. And it was the best conversation I've ever had on those issues.
Isn't it fantastic?
Regulate, they can listen. Like, we had trust, there was mutual respect. It was just like, oh, this is so much easier than talking about this on the internet.
Oh, seriously. And then you get to places that you haven't been before. And then suddenly the polarity flips, and the person who's usually thinking of themselves alternative, suddenly they become the conventional one, and then the other person becomes the unconventional one. And there's just so much room to explore. It's really, I'm writing a book on that right now. Like, if there was a way to start to have these conversations so that we didn't all end up feeling like we just walked into a war zone, it would certainly help.
I mean, let's take this to the bigger level then, because what I'm increasingly seeing around the world, particularly in the States, but also in Europe, is a divisiveness, is a lack of listening on different sides of the political spectrum, for example, and a kind of shoutiness. And also I'm seeing the language of violence used by the left and the right a lot more in America now, Oh, yeah. And it's something has flipped the last year or two. It's turned towards the more polarized, more violent, less listening, less civic. Can you say something a little bit about the big picture here, not just the sort of micro one-on-one example?
Yeah, I mean, I think that, this is my opinion, but I think that there's always, in culture, there's always these progressive tendencies and these preservation tendencies. Some people want things to change, other people want things to go back, and you can think that being world-centric, being able to really identify with others who are different than you, in a way, it requires a little bit more complexity. Being ethnocentric, you sort of want to maintain things the way they are, and ethnocentric people really see the world in terms of us and them. So there's this kind of major culture war between a more world-centric tendency that wants borders and difference and exchange of economies, and then this nationalistic tendency that wants things to be preserved the way they were. And then you add social media to all that. I mean, it used to be that our experience of what was happening in the world was mediated by the media. So in the States, I listened to Walter Cronkite, who was used to end his nightly newscast with "That's the way it is," like this very solid third-person perspective about the news. And then what's happened is that objective viewpoint has now been infused with massive amounts of subjectivity of people's opinions that are kind of postmodern, and then everybody has a platform. So social media, there's no filtering, there's no editing function. So any person that wants to throws up their opinion in a web page, and then they discover in the process that the more outrageous they are, the more hits they get, because our attention goes to threat more than it does to harmony. Then we start noticing these more threatening web pages, and then the whole discourse gets much more highly polarized, to the point that even now people in the center in the States can't win an election. I mean, you literally, it's that polarized. It's like you're either in on the left or on the right, and if you do anything that's center, you lose your election. So.
Yeah, really changed in Britain too. In the 90s, it was the Blair and the Conservatives trying to be the most middle. They were fighting middle,
Yeah, Clinton too. Right. Clinton was very middle.
Far left kind of guy as the opposition leader, and then the Conservatives are the more far right they've ever been.
Yes, exactly.
It pushed them there. So I mean, so there's a few things you pointed there. There's developmental psychology, and for those on the conference, though, Ken will speak more about this idea of the traditionalist and the modern being at war as to what truth is.
Yeah, and Trump, in my view, Trump is not even really a traditionalist. He's a gangster.
Yes.
So you could say that, yeah. And Obama is actually, even in some way, can handle even more complexity. He's multicultural, he's biracial, he surrounds himself with women. I mean, he's just got a much more complex life. And then you have Trump, who's basically a mob boss, who humiliates his enemies and then has them come in and kiss his ring. And that's literally the culture he functions in.
Yes.
And these they couldn't be further apart.
And it's interesting, though, that people swung to Trump, like a lot of people. And I wonder if this wasn't a reaction against some of the postmodernism of there's no such thing as truth. And he really weaponized beyond truth kind of thing, right? It's not
totally. And his truths are simple and they're straightforward and they're instinctive. And of course you build a wall, and of course you America first. And, they're very simple, crude formulations, and people feel relieved by that.
When you're in fight flight, that's almost like a relief, right? It's like, I'm in a bad state, I'm scared. Okay, someone's offering me something solid, something simple.
Yeah. I mean, how are we going to deal with this complexity? How are we going to deal with the Chinese and trade, and how are we going to deal with Latin America and coming to the border, and what are we going to do about, it's like it's too much. And so he makes it very, very, very simple. But if you watch him and listen to him really closely, he's not even a traditionalist. He doesn't think about a system. It's very self-oriented and very crude and very much based on raw power and, like I say, kissing the ring of the person in power.
And what a great representation of the shadow of liberal America as well, right? Money, sex, and power. Who's the three things that my students have the most problems with when it comes to their own ownership of self, right? That they want power, that they're sexual, and that money's not always a bad thing,
Yeah. And then also, as people evolve from a developmental point of view, they actually become less violent. So for him, this is a brawl. The idea that he shouldn't incite his crowds and create this frenzy and make the Democrats bad and wrong and make brown people bad and wrong. Like, for him, that's just what it is. That's how you roll. That's the way it should be done. And, people on the left seem kind of insipid and unwilling to take a stand, but they're literally holding more complexity.
But the left is also making the other side bad and wrong. I see that
for sure.
Recently from the left, right? There's sort of, if you're a conservative, you're the enemy. If you vote, you're a piece of crap.
Yeah.
That's going on both sides.
Because they're also feeling massively threatened. So instead of holding complexity, they also tend to regress to a much more simple position.
Yeah.
And,
Yeah, that's what I realize sometimes when I talk to my friends in the States. It's like I'm not living under this guy, so I'm not in quite the same kind of threat around it. So I'm able to a little bit abstract from it. And some of my friends,
lucky you.
There's a threat response there.
Yeah, well, I think we just had the election yesterday, and basically it was a little bit of a split. we took the House, but they won a couple seats in the Senate. And I think for a lot of people that I know, we were just looking for relief. We were hoping that the election would roll around and there'd be this huge wave, and basically there'd be this referendum on him, and we'd take the House and the Senate, and then he'd be impeached. Somehow we'd get relieved of this guy. It's not going to happen.
You say we, like there's half the country still voting on the other side, right? Like,
I'm telling you.
And it's not them. You're all we. You're all Americans, right?
I know, but I have to say that our identity as Americans at this point in time seems to be all of us, all Americans. And by the way, I was criticized for the fact that Americans call themselves Americans by a Spanish man the other day in a workshop. But United States of American.
Whatever. It's a short answer.
It gets so difficult. I don't remember what I was saying.
Don't worry. No, I love you. But why don't we?
Thank you.
I do. Why don't we end with something fun then?
Okay, let's do something fun. It's true. It all feels hard.
Heavy, and I feel like like you bring a lot to this in terms of Zen, seeing sameness, in terms of the developmental conversation, in terms of the embodied skills to de-stress, to reduce that fight-flight. You also mentioned about erotic tension. So I'm wondering if we can talk about the relationship between the erotic and conflict.
Sure. I mean, I'm no expert. I'm just a person dealing with myself over the years. Well, just the fact that wherever there's two, there's tension. Yeah. And lots of times in erotic exchanges, there's the kind of, as you were just saying, the impulse towards sameness, and then the differences in how they arise and how we navigate that kind of coming together and going apart and coming together and going apart. There's sort of this idea, people have this idea or this hope that somehow when you're in the middle of like the throes of an erotic flame or something, that you're somehow going to merge and you're never going to lose that merging. But the problem always arises when you have to separate again. And then how that separation happens and how the return, the merging happens. It's always in that breath of in and out that the trouble arises. Although we were going to make it fun.
Trouble, but also the eroticism, right? I mean, like me and my wife have way, way more fun after I've been away on a trip and the difference is established. And then when we've been living in each other's pocket and the sameness in eyes, the eroticism's dead. So it's like the difference, which we might see difference as, we should all be one and spiritually we're all one. But it's the difference that creates the friction, right?
Yes, it is. Well, and that's exactly how the universe works too, is that it like the brain is, interacting and it's integrated. And then these new neural pathways open up, and then these new neural pathways that are different eventually get integrated. So difference, our deepest nature is the same, but we actually grow and change and evolve through the encounter with difference. That's absolutely right.
Say that again. That's profound shit, Diane. Come on, say that again. So our deepest nature.
Our deepest nature is we're unified, of course. How could you and I are breathing the same oxygen right now, even though you're in the UK? It's all one big thing. I mean, climate change, the big upside is we're seeing scale and we're seeing how oneness, how it's all one thing.
In Brazil affects us all now, right?
Exactly.
Like, an American policy on industry, or a Russian policy on this is really affecting everyone, and there's no denying that we're linked now, and that's global. Global media, like this at this conference, there's people from I'd say well over 100 countries. It's ridiculous.
It's insane.
Absolutely insane.
That's great.
10,000 plus people from over 100 countries. Probably by the time this is live, 15,000. And like the global scale, and that's just, some kid from East Anglia in England. It's like, this is what we can all do now with this technology. Okay. But it's also, we can spread let's say the idea of how to make a virus that kills everyone, or how to make a nuclear bomb. We could spread that to 10,000 people really easily, So it's like dangerous as well as amazing that we're so connected. Mm-hmm. The reality that we want is really hard to deny, just on a pragmatic level, with the environment, with global trade, with the internet. And there's this idea that spirituality, if we're all one, on another level just doesn't work, because it's the second part of what you said.
Yes.
This, don't learn and grow through that.
Yes, precisely. So we are one, and spiritual practice is about recognizing our unified nature. On the other hand, evolution happens through difference. Ken always talks about quarks become atoms, atoms become molecules, molecules become cells, cells become organs and organisms, organisms become ecosystems, ecosystems interact, the most healthy ecosystems are the most diverse. This whole reality that we're in is just this incredible kind of mashup of sameness and difference. And so if we want to grow, we have to encounter difference. And, people who live in highly conventional cultures and they don't interact with people who are different than they are, they're not stimulated in that way. But those of us who are living in more kind of cultural worlds and we're exchanging, and you're talking to me about the American election and I'm talking to you about Brexit, and we're seeing the differences in our culture. I mean, we're actually kind of growing and changing through this encounter. And so it's important to know that we don't grow without difference. You just simply don't. And that the status quo will eventually become stagnant unless there's an influx of kind of new energy. That's just how it works.
Yeah.
So,
and I'll take the conservative point of view, which is also to say that too much difference is too much chaos, and that doesn't work either, right?
Exactly. Right amount of difference. It's like you could equate it to music, where there's, basically a bass line and then there's a melody, and the melody is sparkling and differentiated, and the baseline is creating continuity. Or if you're in cooking, you have a really beautiful broth, and then the vegetables and the lemon and the cilantro at the end is differentiated and creates a zing. Everything is that in a way.
It's dinner time. Listen, we need to wrap this up. This is brilliant. Thank you so much for making time. I know it was difficult to get you. We managed it. You made time.
Yeah, thank you so much for being persevering.
Anything you want to share on the conference Facebook, that's huge. Please feel free to share your stuff there.
Okay, will do.
Finish. Any final message about the body for everyone who's out there?
Sameness feels really relaxing, and we can let down and we can function and be efficient, and difference is where the challenge and the creativity comes in, but you've got to get used to how it feels in the body, because we tend not to like those sensations. So just know that those sensations are not bad, they're not wrong, but they feel that way. So you have to get used to that.
That's a great message. And if people want to find out more about your stuff, where should they go?
They can find me online at dianemushohamilton.com, or also 2arrowszen.org. And the titles of my books are Everything's Workable and The Zen of You and Me. So.
Not to be confused with Diane Hamilton, the Republican politician who I found while trying to Google your website earlier.
Oh, is that right? She's wrong.
No, she's wrong. This is Musho Hamilton. Musho's the wrong. Diane, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, Mark. It's good to see you. Bye, everybody.
Some ways to get more, to give back, and to get more involved now. So the biggest request I have would be to share the podcast with your friends, people that you think would really enjoy it. Email it to them, put it on your social media, tell them about it, old school. Really appreciate that. Equally, if you want to support us financially, you can go to Patreon. That's patreon.com/embodiment podcast and give us $1 an episode. And I'd say they're well worth $1. So that's less than £1 if you're in UK-ish. So please go there. On the embodifacilitator.com website is where this is hosted. Most people I think listen to for iTunes. iTunes, we'd certainly appreciate a review. The way iTunes works means that a review means more people will find it. iTunes regards it as more important for searches. So even a couple of sentences review really does help as a little thank you to us. And if you want to go to embodifacilitator.com, you can see the actual, links to the sites. There's comments on there. The Facebook group tends to be where people discuss things. So if you go to put in the Embodiment Podcast into Facebook, there's a page which is relatively quiet and a group which does have some discussion on. So I will reply to things personally there. So also on embodifacilitator.com website, there's all sorts of freebies there. There's videos, there's free ebooks, there's ebooks you can buy. And of course, there's our newsletter list. If you want to stay in touch and learn about things like the Embodied Facilitator course and our next Embodied Yoga Principles teacher training, then go to that website and you'll see a little pop-up and you can get the newsletter through there. Okay, so I think they're the main ones. Tell your friends, pay us some money on Patreon, give us a review on iTunes, Send us your email if you want to be on the newsletter list, and get involved on the Facebook there. Bit long. Pick whatever you like that works for you.
Till next time, welcome home to the body.